Well, mainly it was my drug addiction. And that started when I was a teenager, not long after leaving school. Hanging around the wrong crowd, starting to have a few drinks, starting to have a few marijuana joints, and thinking that this was just a lot of fun and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And then I started hanging more around with these particular people, which I found later weren't really the right crowd I should be with. So then continuing on from those small beginnings became worse and worse over time. There was more drugs, more heavier drugs, LSD, prescription drugs, illegal drugs, cocaine, heroin, injecting heroin, a whole range of different chemicals I was flooding my body with, which wasn't very good, and it just got me worse and worse and worse, and got me more confused and didn't know who I was, didn't know where I was going, just continued to go on a cycle, down and down and down. And when I first left school, at this stage I had an apprenticeship as a spray painter of automotive cars. Well, that lasted probably about 18 months, and I needed more money to earn to keep my habit going. Not much common sense at that time. I thought, well, the best thing to do is to throw my apprenticeship away and get a job that pays more money so I can buy more drugs. And at the time I thought that was a good idea, but obviously it was the worst thing I could ever do. And that was the start of my real downhill run. Now, I had a relatively stable upbringing, parents and brothers and sisters, and fairly good childhood, and all of a sudden I'm finding myself very mixed up, confused, screwed up in my thinking, where I was going, no future, no plans for anything. The plans I was obtaining, was coming to me, was how can I get stoned again? Because this was now how I was determining I should be in a normal way. To be high on something what seemed to be a normal way to be. And to not to be on that high was then like, it's unusual, it's not normal for me. I didn't know who I was when I was straight. I found it difficult to communicate. I found it difficult to be responsible in many ways for my own self. And things just continued to get worse as time went on. And of course, when that happens, and in that situation, I went through jobs after jobs, dead-end jobs, going nowhere, and just earning enough money to supply my habit, then finishing that job or being sacked and going and getting another job and doing the same thing and going round and round. And of course, in that period of time, there was, I gave my family a lot of grief. My parents were so worried about me. They were broken-hearted, but I wasn't concerned about them. I was only concerned about me, and more about me. So I went off then, left home, and stayed at friends' houses, and so-called friends, who were also drug addicts, and then not paying rent, getting in debt, trying to live a stable life as an addict is just not possible. It is an impossible thing to do, and there is no way out. So I started then stealing things to get money. I started some minor crime. We would steal things, sell them, break into homes, steal money. Minor crimes, really, but they were still crimes, and that was another way we were trying to get money for our habit. And then came the drug selling. We started selling drugs, all types of drugs we could get our hands on. We had been through a couple of police raids. We went to a ship in Sydney Harbour to buy some marijuana off a fellow who was a foreman of the ship from Asia. And it turned out, we found out later, that this particular man we were talking to and buying our marijuana off was a very high-class heroin dealer importing kilos of heroin into Australia. Well, of course, then we got suspected of being the Sydney connection for all this. So at one stage, we had a dozen police raiders. I rushed around and tried to get out the back door. I was held up with a 45 in my face. A lot of trauma, a lot of drama. But it turned out that we weren't actually the Australian connection. But anyway, everything got sorted out in the end. Not too bad, but that was just one part of my crime experience. And so over time, I would continually search for drugs, trying to buy better drugs at a better price and more drugs and as much as I could get for as least effort as I could do. And this time, looking for drugs and selling drugs, I ended up in King's Cross, being introduced to some Turkish people there who had their own organised crime going there, where we used to meet in the top of a strip club in the main street of King's Cross, and there would be a gun on the table and sitting around doing deals of 100 kilo lots, delivering to Wollongong. And after a period of time, I heard a few things about these people and I thought I'd better get out of there. And which is what I did, and luckily I got out without too much trouble. And I got myself set free of all of that involvement with those particular people. But it was still a place I never expected to be as I was leaving school, being involved with people like this and doing this sort of thing. And it was the last thing I ever thought. I used to think that, you know, something would work out for my life as I went on, but I thought I would just be Mr. Normal like everybody else, but never suspecting I would be an addict and moving around King's Cross with organised crime people. So this is what drugs can do, and they do it quite well. And this was my journey. And so there are many journeys, of course, that are just as bad and worse. So I was starting then to inject heroin, and I was breaking into houses and getting money and stealing stuff and just getting into the crime area, not really heavy crime. We didn't do any armed hold-ups or anything, but I come close once in that, but I was able to, for some reason, I realised that the heroin I was injecting was getting a little bit out of hand. I'd been injecting for about a year, and one day I just pulled the needle out of my arm and I just said, well, that's enough, I'm not touching anymore, this is getting too bad, because it was taking total control over me, absolutely. So I was able to give that away, and I gave that away. And during all of these drug-induced experiences, I ended up on the street and sleeping where I could, never ever just imagining I could ever be homeless when I was younger. And to realise that you are homeless, sitting there without a roof, without a bed, without a family, it was very depressing to say the least. And strangely enough, I couldn't understand how I got there, how I was going to get out, and where I was going to end up. I had no concept of the future, so I just continued to be homeless, to sleep in parks, to sleep wherever I could, to mix with people who were the same as me or very similar, and no prospects or plans for any future or any positive change in my, or better change in my life. So it was homelessness was extremely degrading, depressing, and bad. And it was one of the worst experiences I've ever had, and would never want to do that ever again.